Добрый вечер.
Good evening. We've had our introductions. We'll have three Alexanders in this session. Yes. We'll talk about the future. We'll talk about Russia and the future because when we talk about Russia in the future, you always have this kind of a complex situation. On the one hand, you have strategies, Russia 2020, Russia 2035. You talk about achieving breakthroughs going forward. On the other hand, I don't know if it's because of our communist past. Russia is tired of talking about future. Especially in the 20th century, we always talked about the future. This was the center of our ideology. The communists kept talking about the future. We had 5-year plans. People talked about moving on to a new economic model. We had a plan when Mr. Khrushchev said we'll achieve communism by 1980. So all the thinking, all the ideology was about the future. This was hammered into our heads. Maybe it's because of that or for some other reason. When we look at Russia today, even when we talk about the future, our thinking is kind of ancient. We understand that the future will be better than the past and than what we have today. We believe in progress. This is a natural condition. Actually, in ancient times, people used to think that the past was the best time ever, and then things only get worse, and you have just to survive your stage of degradation. So your mission on this planet is to do your best at the stage of degradation you live in. And then Jewish, Christian ideology came in, and then people started talking about science and progress. Well, Russia is a kind of in an ancient state. We talk about the future, but we keep looking at the past, saying that they have the golden age in the past. The Tsar period, the Romanov period was the apex of our history. Is it natural for Russia to look at the past? Or is it just a temporary stage, and maybe it's even dangerous? Do we need to break out of this condition? Alexander, you're closer to me, so you go first. Well, if you say Alexander, you have to specify which Alexander you're talking to. Well, personally, I don't think this is something unique for Russia, for Russian culture, that we only talk about the Bolshoi theater, our missiles that we had in the 1950s, and the wars that we won in the 19th and the 20th centuries. I think these are temporary stages that are alternating. For example, China spent a lot of effort and a large chunk of its history. When China thought it achieved anything that could be achieved, they were #1 country in the world. This was at about 1500, and they decided to burn its navy. And then 3 centuries later, China was a state that was about to fall apart, and for the next 100 years, it was in a very poor condition. They needed Deng Xiaoping to look back at the future again and realize that it won't be easy. And we had similar periods in Russian history. We had periods of breakthroughs where force was used to make it to the future. And then, in some rare cases, there were other models when people would take decades to change certain things. The most successful economic period was the great reforms by Alexandr II, also Alexander. Great Reforms by Alexandr II. This was an attempt to get to the future, realizing that this path won't be easy and that you have to change things that won't change fast. I think, apart from this attempt to have this forced breakthrough or gradual changes, you also have a third model, and this is what we are doing today. And this is not the first time we have this situation in Russia's history, maintaining some kind of balance, and then just hope for the stars or for God or for the good luck of the country to get this country to a better place. Usually, this is a period of stagnation. But we don't know which way works best. I like what Alexandr II did. I like this kind of evolutionary approach. So, I don't think this is something unique for Russia. Our uniqueness is different. Well, I think you said that culture is a verdict, or culture is fate. Some people say that our culture, Russian culture, has a lot of things that keeps us back from reaching the future, the Orthodox faith or Mongolian rule. Actually, 100 years ago, being part of Asia was an equivalent of being a backward country. And these seemed like we were doomed to always be a backward country, but now there's no contradiction. Living in Asia and being successful, being advanced, being forward-thinking. Alexander, Mamut, what about you? Have you ever seen a person who would be a businessman and at the same time a visionary, man of the future? Have you ever seen Russian people, or maybe there is something that holds Russian people back, holds them from reaching out to the future? You know, personally, I think that the future has one characteristic. The future comes, it arrives, and no one can argue with this simple statement. The past is past, the past is gone, and the future will come. You have to, if you're skeptical about that, or even if you're scared of that, or if you're scared of the future will come nonetheless. Sometimes when I hear people talking about the image of the future, the outlook for the future, I think they're trying to be careful. Instead of talking about the future, they want to talk about the image of the future, the outlook of the future. If we like that, we may want to experience that, but regardless of what you decide, even if you decide not to go there, the future will come to you nonetheless. So either you are prepared for the future. Well, how do you prepare yourself for the future? If you're still talking about the image of the future. For example, we don't have a picture yet, but we are going to build a building. And you know, we just had Rem Koolhaas speaking here in one of the previous sessions. He said, architecture is when you implement your vision of the future. If you want to build a building that will be there for the next 50 to 60 years, this is what modern architects usually have in mind when they build new buildings. So you need to know a little bit about life in 30 years from now, in 40 years from now. So if we do large-scale construction, I just don't want us to stray too far from the subject of urban development. I would like to bring us back to architectural matters. So if you have your vision for the future, you have some kind of plan, where do you get this picture of the future, the outlines of the future? Who can show it to you? I only know two ways to do that. Science Science, as represented by Mr. Auzan here, science can predict based on its observations, based on its knowledge, great minds, but not too many people understand science. And then there is art. Art can give you a picture of the future, some kind of text, some pictures. I can give you a lot of examples, but arts can do that as well. So I think people of science and people of arts who care about the future, who are passionate about the future, they're the ones who represent the future, and based on their concept, based on their vision, we can see signs of the future every day. If you look at your everyday life, you will see a lot of tendencies or trends or signs or indications of the coming future. I can talk about this at length. We can talk about this later. Okay, I stop here then. That's fine. Well, I have objections. Yes, the future will come anyway, but there are different options when we talk about the future. So at least we should know what we should aspire to. There are countries where people want to live, where people want to go, countries which people all agree are successful. And then there are countries that are neither successful nor the ones where people would like to go. But still, people living in those countries feel quite happy. These are three different visions about the future. Let me be even more specific. Where do migrants, where do they want to live? Do they want to live in Croatia or Hungary? No, they all want to live in Germany. When you have well-educated migrants, which country do they want to live in? They all want to live in the United States. Why the US? Or South Korea, they write about those countries. Why? Why nobody wants to go there? So we keep choosing between different types of the future. And we are also different. We can choose different things. So going back to culture and what culture has to do with this. You know Rudyard Kipling. We all appreciate him as the author of our favorite book. We loved it as kids, Mowgli. He was a British intelligence officer, and he said something about the Russian people. He said that Russians think they're the most easternmost nation of the Western nations. Actually, they're the westernmost nation of Oriental nations. You know, based on our study, based on our research we did together with the Shanin Institute, this is actually true. For 200 years, we've been arguing. First, we had this dispute between Slavophiles and Westerners. Well, I can tell you, we are right in the middle between the West and the East. We are individualists and collectivists at the same time. We can join Korea, China, and Japan, or we can also join Sweden, England, and Germany. But there are things in our culture that stand in our way. You said you saw something in my articles or in my lectures. No, this was me. This is Andrei Konchalovsky, our film director, who talked about this. He had those lectures at Moscow State University. He had this idea in his lectures, but even he says that culture is changeable. You can change your culture. Technologically, what holds us back? Do we want our future to be different? Yes, we have. Our long-term plans are much better than U.S. plans because Americans think they live in the country they like. And we think our country needs to be different. But we have two factors which prevent us from introducing new technology, venture markets, and so on. The big gap between the people and the government, but we are not the worst country in this respect. We rank only third behind Iran and Saudi Arabia. And avoiding ambiguity. Don't open that door. Some scary things may be behind this door. Don't get rid of this person because the next person can be even worse. Don't try to change this system. You can't reach the future if you have this kind of mindset. And of course, it's no accident that we have this kind of mentality. I think this comes as a result of shock therapy back in the 90s. Like, people who used to go to the dentist back in the 80s or 90s, they are still afraid of dentists today. So we are afraid of reforms in much the same way. We want to change things without changing anything. So what you're saying is, it's not because of serfs, not because of slavery, it's because of the 90s that people are scared of change, right? And because of this attempt to reach out to the future, break away from the socialist planned economy, we got this traumatic experience of the 90s, and now people are afraid of change. So what's the way out in this situation? Well, the previous experience was also traumatic. The socialist plan economy was also an attempt to get to the future, and it was also traumatic. So how do we get away from this traumatic experience? Well, guys, you have to understand we have some cultural traits we can rely on. For example, for decades or centuries, we had to deal with something Leskov described in his book, The Lefty. We can build a satellite or a spaceship or a nuclear reactor or a turbine, but in 100 years we were unable to build a good car, a good refrigerator, a good PC.
We are the masters of doing one-off things, small number of things. As soon as we try to do anything mass production, we've lost it previously to Germans, to Chinese, to you name it. But the world is changing. In digital economy, there is a notion of customization. Now, the producing individualized, product for individual customer is as cheap as you do mass production. It's a printing technologies and stuff. This is really our chance, the chance of Russia. We can, of course, sleep on that chance, but we can miss the chance. But we have to think seriously because technological, lagging behind is absolutely non-acceptable. Alexandr, what would you say? Have you, in your experience, dealt with avoiding uncertainty as a stumbling block? Is there any way to get rid of this paradigm of avoiding uncertainty? Yes, sometimes there is, in culturology, they call it concept of the mass mentality. I would totally agree that there is such a future fear of the future, and hence is the habit not to change anything. But people are different. We're all different. And some of us, due to the passions level and their idiosyncrasies and energy, they go beyond these personal fears and phobias, and they're making breakthroughs, all kinds of breakthroughs. And by leaving the country and by choosing new challenges for self-actualization, I think the problem about the need to change. It's rooted in the fact that it would be good for us to make up our minds about simple hierarchy of values or pyramid of values. What is in our public life, in our societal life, is the main thing. It's my humble opinion that the main thing in in our lives is the human life, the sacredness of human life, their rights, their joy, their self-actualization opportunities of their rights and possibilities. This is, so to speak, a humanistic scale of values, which is understood as humanism, which is understood as trying to protect humans from the external environment. And in the logic of these kind of judgments, you can see certain arguments that human capital is of primary importance, that economy of the future is about humans and revolves around the humans, that we see the cases of amazing human endeavor and achievements, that the whole world is fighting for these innovators, and even the cities are trying to attract the talent and attract this kind of people. And many of them do so very successfully. It's not even about the countries anymore, it's about the cities who can attract the talent. And I believe that it all starts with us thinking about a person, about human-centric approach. Like Alexandr has said, that how come we cannot make a car, we cannot make a cell phone or TV? We don't have it. But we have one huge state or government symbol, like a tank, something big and grand. Because attention to that is not nearly enough. Okay, we will solve these little issues as we go. So I think it's about making a top priority human values in human life. This should be a starting point. Well, I am afraid that this problem, to put it mildly, it does not have a finite solution. When John Maynard Keynes came back to the USSR, he had had a very short visit to the Soviet Union. He then published an article in which he formulated what economists are naming the dilemma of impossible. You cannot at the same time to maximize personal freedoms, then efficiency, and social justice. You can't juggle these three balls at the same time. You are always forced to call one thing the principle, the main, other things becoming secondary to that, or a problem. In my opinion, we will keep wandering in this triangle, because it's about three ideologies: liberalism, which is about the freedom; national conservatism, about the nation's overall efficiency; and social movements about the social fairness or justice. It's a big choice of what's the Russian choice right now. I believe that before 2014, we still maintain that the main thing for the Russian society is a man, is a person with their private property, with their dreams and aspirations, because people look into the future differently, depending whether you're individualistic, then it's a long-term perspective, or if you think about the private property which will be handed down from generation to generation, or about the personal competitiveness, even if social institutions will be bad, but you believe, hey, I'm very competitive and I'll remain so, it doesn't matter who is the king, who is the president. But if you're collectively minded, you are relying on your own, that your own people will help you, will push your ideas forward. So since 2014, I believe that we've shifted these values, and now we're moving towards different values. We had a great country. We had a great country which could not even feed its own population. That is the USSR. Okay, we've dealt with this in 20 years. Now we have a consumer society. And then we remember it was a great country. Can we at the same time be sated and be great? It doesn't work very well so far. It doesn't work very well. But But the pendulum has swung to a different side, not the one that you're pointing to, Alexandra. That is not to say that I'm not sharing your opinion. I'm trying to say that the movement within this triangle of ideas, this Keynes's dilemma of impossible, will continue. If you will remember that Russia is drastically a country of inequality, whenever the social justice is knocking your door, and when this knock becomes a strong pounding, well, that's not an easy situation. I just want people to be happy when they are alive, okay? I don't mind. I'm free, but I think that people are waiting for a different answer. They are probably waiting from us. How are we going to move into this bright future? You see, I was speaking about our technological backwardness. Look at these industrial robots per 10,000 of employees. What do we have? In Russia, on average in the world, 74 industrial robots per 10,000 employees. In Russia, 3 robots. 3. In People's Republic of China, 68. In USA, 189. Well, Japan 303, Germany 309, Singapore 488, and South Korea is 670 something. This is the degree of our technological backwardness, which makes us think, how can we survive in this world in the future? And then there may be different ways to solve this problem depending on what you and I believe to be our values or limitations which we can step over. Well, simply, Alexandr Mamut was speaking that, people are trying to plan their own future, and they have a right to be happy here and now. And then certain, authority or agency come to them, be it a business, be it something, or someone else, or experts and scientists are saying, no, your future is going to be different. You have made it all wrong. And because this technological development is accelerating around the globe, people are in limbo. And how can we combine this? And is it possible to combine technological breakthrough, which we desperately need, and not even to have a social justice, but some degree of human happiness? Can these two things be owned together? John Rawls, the philosopher, the author of the Justice of the New Public Agreement Theory, he said that happiness is the feeling of success and implementation of your life plan. What if this plan is taken away from an individual? This is why, in this case, I am not against of what Alexandr said. I am trying to explain to us that we are in a much more complex notional system. I agree with Alexandr about the human capital, that he becomes the basis of competitiveness. You know what these people who are the owners of the human capital, they want to be the owners of the environment. They want to rebuild, reconfigure what's around them according to their own tastes. Today we've had a roundtable for digital economies. The minister of the Moscow government has said that we want the people of Moscow via the smart city to build individual trajectory. It doesn't matter what you choose, you choose your own thing, your own career, etc. If this will work out, it will be a magnet which will be pulling in people of high education and people of high production. Because going back to this analogy about different countries, why these kind of magnets are working in the countries where people want to go. Educated people want to go to these countries and live in these countries because they have inclusive institutions. You can fine-tune this social environment according to your own tastes and preferences. To give you an example, now we are speaking that the private people's tax, the individual's tax, they have to be paid by your location, by your residence. where you actually live, in that municipality where you live, because in this case you have an instrument of changing your external environment. And there is also reason for competition between municipalities. We want to have people live in our municipality. No, we want them to live in our municipality. This is the path to change our environment. And I agree, this is the way to happiness. It's a strange idea to many, but I've been insisting on that. It's a selective taxation. You can vote with your currency, with your money. Give us the keys of how we can reconfigure this system, change the external system around us. And then we will have more creative people living and working in our city and country. You know, the knowledge and the professional skills become obsolete very fast now. Is it possible for a person, and who should be making this planning in the future? Is it possible to plan your future? Because we've seen the crash of the planned economy, which was the Soviet Union. On the other hand, can we trust the regular people to plan their own future? Because we can see how European drivers are planning their future by banning the Uber taxi or taxi application, because they planned to buy a license for $50,000 to $70,000, which will be fitting them for life, and then the new application comes and that's it, boom, you're in the dust. That is stopping the future as a part of their democratic voting and their democratic institutions, parliament representation. But the countries which do not have it all of a sudden are not burdened by such difficulties. Even if you read some of your reports, the value of institutes for the future is very important, because social institutes are the vessels of the future. And secondly, if you think about the people who live in Moscow, how would they think about the future 15 years ago? More parking spaces, bigger cars. For me to buy a new car, to be a new SUV, and to go to a parking place, to go to a shopping mall, to go to a restaurant and park my bigger car, more shopping malls, bigger cars. He or she is living in their countryside, and then they go to this shopping mall. And if you ask city dwellers about 15 years ago, I want always to buy better and bigger cars. And then there is a GPS module, and the new technologies present themselves, and the new program of the city's authorities, which is also sort of removing all of that for the better of the city, of course. So how can a simple person with their ever obsolete knowledge in planning our common future? Now there'll be a little bit of this amateurish urbanism. How can a simple person plan their own future, or our common future? It's a very difficult question. I don't have a direct answer to that, but I understand that the global trend and the Russian trends is that people are beginning to live in cities more and more. In our country, 75% of population is urbanized population. People like to go to interesting places to live and work. You can have a different attitude. You can take it as a fact. It's a global trend. It's been happening all over the world because it's a big city. And it gives all of us more opportunities to find job, to get their education, to build a family, to get entertained, and so forth. But we see this only now. What will be in the future? Because the cities are increasing their potential. The economy is becoming urbanized. All these big high-tech achievements, usually this is economy of the city or economy of these urbanized territories. Whenever I come to Strelka, GK, I'm told that always some big companies are saying, can you please draw us the Silicon Valley? Like, we have 10,000 hectares, let's build the Silicon Valley on these 10,000 hectares. Draw us, we want to have our own Silicon Valley. I see it again and again, that people think it's only enough to draw into plan and you'll have your own Silicon Valley. But the thing is that Silicon Valley is the morphology of urbanized territory, which is happening between universities, between big companies, among the huge number of people who are creating startups. Usually, these are the people which leave the bigger companies like IBM and Microsoft, which also reside in California, building new businesses. This is how Silicon Valley is built. It's difficult to draw it as a blueprint and say, hey, we are making Silicon Valley here. It can be only in this kind of society between universities. So the city of Moscow has a huge potential to become a Silicon Valley. And scientists and startups, they do not live, outside in the outskirts. In Obninsk, in Sarov, they want to live in the center of the alive and pulsating city, which gives you all the opportunities, sport parkings, theaters, social life, etc., etc. So the city of the future, in my point of view, is the teaching city. It's a friendly city. Like the mayor said today, it's the city which is open to people, the city which does not let you fall into oblivion. Really, like you're losing your profession because you're raising a bar somewhere, you've been, the guard, and then something changed, and you lost your job, and your industry died. You want to find some course, retraining course, 3 months long or 6 months long, and the city helps you. Okay, we have this kind of retraining program, this kind of requalification program. And my question is to both of you, Alexandros. Do you believe in the future is competition of cities or competition of countries? It even crosses today's argument between Mr. Sabin and Mr. Kipling. Do we need to build Moscow agglomeration, or do we need to spread our resources thin? So the future is Moscow versus Tokyo, or this would be the centers of competition. And what do we do if the future is a competition of cities? How about the people who are not part of these big agglomerations? People who do not live in these big mega cities. You see, in the argument between Sergei Sobyanin and Alexei Kudrin, I can give you some arguments which have brought me and Alexei Kudrin to the conclusion that agglomeration is good. If you don't do anything, by 2015 there'll be a super agglomeration from Krasnodar via Rostov-on-Don to Moscow all the way to St. Petersburg, and 90% of population will be there, and there'll be all of Russia. There'll be no one in the Middle East. There'll be so-called rocket Redberg on Moscow. This is what will happen naturally. What we are saying is how can we impact this process and to build a certain number of agglomerations like at Urals and in Siberia at the Far East. Why? Of course, people do not live in agglomerations only. The labor productivity, the very fact that you move your operations into agglomeration, your labor productivity will rise by 15%. And we are lagging behind the US by factor of 3 in terms of labor productivity. And 15% is a lot because there is more competition in a city, more dense environment. You can find new opportunities. But I would go back to the question of who is competing with who. I would say that in our future, it's not even the country, it's not even cities competing, because the subjects of competition, generally speaking, us humans, we have different perceptions about the future of the country and cities. We are forced to find consensus, which is the toughest thing to do in Russia. I keep saying Russia is the country of very smart people who absolutely cannot reach an agreement. And the main slogan is, I'm not going to sit next to this guy. Thank God we have the national anthem, we have a flag, but there's no motto, because the motto would be, get out of my way, or I'm on my own. And going back to the cities, I agree with Alexandr that the city should be friendly, but it can also be diverse and versatile. We had a joint study with the Strelka Institute. By the way, with some architects from the OMA. It was very good team indeed. We were trying to understand how artificial cities impact culture. How do they form culture? Because we've had many cities like that. This would be St. Petersburg, Brasilia, Canberra, Washington, and many others. And what do they build? Actually, present-day Astana in Kazakhstan. So whenever we say that something stops us in our culture, this can be shifted, given two conditions. First, that you're not fighting against your own culture. Otherwise, you will split the country, and the country will bog down in civil strife and all kind of upheaval and uprisals. But you're trying to change something in your culture. How? Via education, via certain information policy, and through architecture as well, because Summer Garden, it used to be the great discovery of St. Petersburg master plan. I am Muscovite to my core, to my bones, but I have to admit that it turns out that when there is a head of state appears, you should not fall down, but you can be with him, with her in one space. And then they had these cities, gardens, the regional gardens. When the governor was walking, you could talk to this person. He was exactly in the same suit like everyone else. And by the way, you're speaking about the pedestrian city project, when people resettled from their Mercedes-Benzes, having lifted the dignity of a pedestrian. They psychologically moved people from their limos onto the broadwalk. But I can say that there is no such one answer in a reliable way, because in 1866, in the Summer Garden, Dmitry Kharakosov, he shot the Tsar, the liberator Alexander II. He had the guard of only 2 people. He didn't need to be guarded because there was a benevolent relations between the authorities and the ordinary people. And then they tried. Then the intelligentsia had a different opinion about the future. And I'm going back to this idea that inability of Russia to reach an agreement, is the main ailment before we try to align our plans for the future. How can we make choice between different plans for the future if they're competing? Who is doing that? Our government, experts, because they're wise, maybe. Alexandr will say, business will do it because they're counting their money. Even in Moscow, there were several competing plans for the future development. Of course, I would like the voice of architects and urbanists and researchers would be loud, would be clear, would be heard. Unfortunately, this is not always the case, but in our times, this informational space is quite dense. You may have your own mobile phone. That's it. You have a media outlet in your hand. You are an active member of some communication, be it in social media or elsewhere, or in some other media projects. You can extrapolate your point of view. And this discussion beginning to make sense. It's done in the public domain, it's transparent, and in this sense, it is not something like a top-down approach, it's more horizontal. At least I want to believe it. I'm not so sure we have a lot of time left. So I would like to get not too long an answer to my short question. My question is, what industries, what branches of science are associated with the future? Future will happen where? Maybe some names even. Future is where? In what industries? In what fields? With what names? I would put it in this way. I believe that a chance of today's Russia in a digital economy simply because we're here. We're not too obsolete, we're not too redundant. What's important in high tech is the very good mathematics, and we have very good starting positions because Russian mathematical school math is very good. But within the digital economy, I believe that priority lines of development for a breakthrough would be things related to smart city, digital healthcare, and digital industry. I'll explain why, because it's about the smart city, because we either live in this environment or we don't. So this could be the agenda for a breakthrough. Digital healthcare, simply because the healthcare is horrible. And we may not appear in this future unless we find a good digital solutions. And the big data is already enabling one to make diagnosis better than the doctors. I will repeat after Napoleon that the war is too serious to trust it to the generals. Maybe the medicine is too important to trust it to doctors. Maybe it's an AI and the coders that have to deal with it. And the industry. What are we going to do in terms of our industries? How are we going to take what we have in our defense industry and complex, and we have some competitive points because of the choices we've made and because of our current values in the country. This is why I would say that this is where I'm seeing the springboard. We're working in Moscow State University and in consortia about digital economy. I would like to say that the future is related to the endless development and improvement of the educational process, passing on the knowledge, passing on the cultural experience, best practices. And I want the Moscow State University to have some connection with other colleges and universities, so that the one feature of Moscow would be it's a university town, which is the place to build and develop new professionals. I'm not arguing. I simply have a conflict of interest when he's saying let's promote the education in Moscow State University. But I would agree that these two things can be done in the scientific valley of the Moscow State University, not only in MGU, in Moscow State University. An hour ago, we had a conversation with Vladimir Vasilyev, director of ITMO, and different school, because we need to combine the Moscow economic approach, engineering school. Thanks, Alexandr. It's a good idea. And thanks to both Alexandrs, to Alexandr Auzan, we're about to finish, and to the third Alexandr, the moderator, we're into all the emperors who happen to be Alexandrs and who have been mentioned. If we're saying now that we are competing with the rest of the world or trying to catch up with the world, we need to find some breakthrough points for the high-tech breakthrough points, and Moscow is the place where we can have a critical mass for this breakthrough. And we are going to help it. Thank you.